All right, I'm going to try and get everybody in here to start the evening activities. And I'll need to get Dr. Stringer up here kind of close. I'm not ready for Dr. Stringer quite yet, but we'll need him up closer for a minute. But if I could, I'd like Dr. Jim Scudder to come up at this time. Dr. Scudder, can I entice you up here? The King James Bible Research Council would like to present this to you. It's a resolution of appreciation, brother, and I just want to tell you everything's been top drawer. It says, whereas Quinton Road Baptist Church has consistently supported the mission of the King James Bible Research Council, whereas this church has graciously hosted the King James Bible Research Council 2019 National Conference, whereas their pastors and congregation have shown zeal for the King James Bible and the underlying text, let it be resolved that we express publicly our thankfulness and appreciation to the pastors and congregation of Quinton Road Baptist Church for their love for this biblical cause. Let it be known that they're staying with the old paths is an example for others to honor and follow. This day of compromise, may you have courage, conviction, and consistency continue to shine as a beacon of hope, signed by myself as president and Dr. Phil Stringer as the vice president. Thank you so much, Pastor.
Thank you very much. We're really honored. Thank you.
All right, this time, Dr. H.D. Williams is not able to be with us this year, but we saw a part of, saw his presentation earlier this morning, and we're going to listen to my introduction that I did down at their church, Zion Hill, a Baptist church in Cleveland, Georgia. So we're going to play that now, and then Dr. Stringer is going to present the award to me on his behalf. So if we can see that. Yeah, well, at least this generation, for a number have been Yankees, but I was just over to where our family had land in North Carolina. It butted up to the Cherokee land. And my great-great-grandfather married a Cherokee lady years and years and years ago. So we have some roots here. I just want to thank Pastor Nix, the dear folks of Zion Hill Baptist Church. I feel like this is my second home. I have stayed numerous times in the apartment of Doc and Pat. But I'm thankful for this church that's allowing us to record Dr. Williams' message for our upcoming National King James Bible Research Council Conference in Illinois. Doc couldn't make it this year. This is, each year we award somebody who we think's worthy of it for what's called the Defender of Scripture Award. And this year it is going to be Dr. H.D. Williams. Now, he and I have already had a battle about this. Doc wanted me to say that he's only a sinner saved by grace, and that's what we are all. We're only sinners saved by grace. But because of the people who are going to be at the conference, I want to give a little biographical information about Doc for them, because we will be showing this at the national conference and his message as well, Pastor. So that's the reason for this. Brother Williams was saved at the age of 14 in a local Baptist church. The pastor at that time was J.R. White. After graduating with honors from high school, he attended Stetson University, where he met his wife, Patricia. And like my wife, he married her when she was a teenager. He was a mature 20, just like me. But anyway, they were married in 1961. Brother Williams is an ordained Baptist preacher, and he received his biblical training at Stetson University, Moody Bible Institute, and Louisiana Baptist University. He holds a PhD from there, but he's a medical doctor. Brother Williams is a medical doctor, graduating with honors from the University of Miami Medical School. And he served his community by serving, if you can imagine this, 40,000 patients through a clinic that he managed that had 17 doctors. He served his nation as the company commander of the medical unit, I believe a rank of major, if I'm not mistaken, or was it lieutenant colonel? I don't remember. But anyway, for the Florida National Guard. He served his Lord and is serving his Lord. He's done things like be an associate pastor, go on numerous, short-term missionary trips, and teaching Sunday school, Wednesday nights, filling pulpits, and has taught courses to pastors and served on numerous medical boards of directors and Christian boards of directors, including the King James Bible Research Council. And he is a prolific author defending our King James Version of the Bible. That's one of the key reasons, because he's been faithful to the Lord and his wife been faithful to the Lord all these years. But he's written numerous books defending the King James Bible, many of them who are used in translating the underlying proper text. But he's written books like the King James Bible's Accuracy and Faithfulness, The Lie That Changed the Modern World, The Miracle of Biblical Inspiration, word-for-word translation of the received text, verbal plenary translating, Hearing the Voice of God, and then a book exposing the Septuagint, the pure Word of God, and the attack upon the canon of the Scriptures. I'm thankful for those books. I have many of them in my library. He and his wife, Patricia, continue to serve the Lord in so-called retirement. Okay? And what I have been very thankful for is that they started the Old Paths publication. They've published all 6 of my books, as well as numerous other books. And these books have to be biblically sound. These books have to use the King James Version of the Bible, or they won't publish them. The books are distributed in the United States, the UK, Australia, and other nations. You can buy the books on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and others. But King James Bible Research Council is pleased to present Dr. H.D. Williams with the Defender of Scriptures Award, which I will be sending to you as soon as the annual conference is over. I'd like to introduce to you, who needs no introduction, Dr. H.D. Williams, and he's going to share the message that we're going to be airing at the King James Bible Research Council Conference. Dr. Williams, please. Looks like, and then we'll get the presentation. We'll cut it off after he comes forward. There we go. That's good. Thank you.
Not only is Dr. Williams an incredible author and speaker on this subject, not only has he made it possible for many books to be published with his publishing company, for years I have watched him exercise the gift of encouragement for folks that are involved in this. Again and again, if you have a problem or challenge, Dr. Williams is the first person that calls. You know he prays for you. He looks for ways to help, both mechanical and material and publishing and so forth, but just always being the encouragement when folks go through the challenges that come with this. So I'm just really thrilled that our organization is honoring Dr. Williams. I'm going to present this. Dr. Brown's receiving it for him, and we'll get it to him. But it says King James Bible Research Council presents Defender of the Scriptures Award. When we started this, we wanted an opportunity to say thank you to some of the folks who have really dedicated themselves, and we've done this over the years. Yes. We gave it to Del Johnson several years ago, who's been here at this church a number of times. But I can't think of anyone more deserving than Dr. Williams, and I appreciate you receiving this for him. Right. Thank you,
Thank you.
Friend.
I certainly appreciate Dr. Williams and the encouragement he has been to me. I was trying to bring up the last session. I know that there's a lot of people who have to get along and move, but I think that's some valuable things for you. I'm going to share with you about King James and the King James Bible. This is Hampton Court Palace. If you ever get a chance to go to the UK outside of London, is Hampton Court Palace. A lot of interesting things have happened there at Hampton Court Palace, but none the least of them was the organizational meeting for making the King James Version of the Bible. We'll get to that a little bit later. I'm going to talk to you about the birth of King James VI of Scotland. He becomes King James I of England a little bit later. But King James was born on June 19th in 1566 to Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, that isn't to be confused with Bloody Mary, two completely different people. And her second husband, who was Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, and he was born at Edinburgh Castle. I've actually been in the very room where he was born. Stuart was Mary's cousin. However, it was a very turbulent time in Scotland. The Presbyterians were prevailing over the Catholics, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was Catholic by her religious denomination, and the Scottish Presbyterians were in power at that time. Just as a side note, Mary's first husband was Francis II, the King of France, and he died of an ear infection after being King of France for only 1 year, leaving Mary a widow at age 18, if that isn't interesting. Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, he mysteriously was strangled in his garden. They had previously been attempts to take his life by an explosion. He survived that, but James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, he's the one who is believed to be responsible for King James's father's death. And interestingly enough, he married the queen soon after. A little bit of intrigue. But we come here to the child king. James was only 13 months old when he became King of Scotland on July 24th, 1567. So that means regents ruled the kingdom, because a 13-month-old can't do anything except give a bunch of problems. So anyhow, that's the way it is. So James comes to the English throne. His mother Mary, she had to leave the kingdom, or she fled the kingdom actually, for England in 1568. Never saw her son again. Ultimately, she was put to death in England, but she never saw King James again, and I think that James kind of held that against some people because of that. But King James VI of Scotland became James I when he was named successor to the English throne by his cousin Elizabeth III, and he ascended to the English throne in 1603. King James I of England, he was the very first of the Stuart kings, and he died of a stroke in 1625 after ruling Scotland for 58 years and England for 22 years, and not religiously speaking, but in relationship to peace, war, and that sort of things, it was actually some very peaceful years for him. So his wife, the wife of King James, in 1589, at age 24, he marries 15-year-old Anne of Denmark. They had 7 children. Only 3 survived into adulthood. Henry Frederick, though he died at 18, and then there was Elizabeth and Charles I. I just want to tell you something. Unlike Henry VIII and many of the English kings, James taught that a king should be a moral person. He taught that they should be faithful to his wife, and he set a high moral standard and example for his people. As a result of that, some of them passed on rumors that weren't true. We'll come into some of those. But because he didn't have a bunch of young floozy women around his court, they falsely accused him of being a homosexual. We'll deal with that a little bit later. But it was common for kings to have a number of mistresses. In France, the king's mistresses were considered an official members of the royal court, but King James would not have any of that. In fact, his lack of mistresses at his court were used later on as proof that King James was a homosexual. However, the lack of mistresses is also a sign of a godly man leading a clean, moral life. After 23 years of marriage, he wrote this to his wife. He said, "I thank God I carry that love and respect unto you, which, by the law of God and nature, I ought to do to you as my wife and the mother of my children." It says, "For the respect of your honorable earth and descent I married you, but the love and respect that I have now bear for you, for that ye are my married wife, and so partaker of my honor, as of all other fortunes." It says, "Were ye a king's or a cook's daughter, ye must be all alike to me, being one my wife." He loved his wife. At Anne's death, he wrote, "She was an excellent wife unto us. She has left a great longing for her." He missed his wife. Then you have, I probably shouldn't say it in this official capacity, but Sir Anthony Weldon was a lowlife. Now, King James wasn't a particularly astute at character judgment, but Weldon, his name spelled several different ways if you're researching him, he was knighted by King James I, and he became a part of the royal court until he was dismissed in 1617 for his racist and vitriolic attack against the Scottish people. Better be careful, I'm Scottish, well, he's long dead. But Sir Anthony Weldon wrote this. Now, this is what got him in trouble. You think about it. "Their flesh," speaking of the Scots, "naturally abhors cleanliness." Now remember, he's King James VI of what? Scotland, okay? "Their breath commonly stinks of pottage." Good grief. Yeah. "To be chained in marriage with one of them were to be tied to a dead carcass and cast into a stinking ditch." I do wonder that King James should be born in so stinking a town as Edinburgh in lousy Scotland. Well, as a result of that, he was expelled from the royal court. Weldon never got over being expelled from the king's court in 1617. He swore vengeance. "I am going to get even with that king." He liked being in the king court and the honor and the respect that was there. And so he writes the court and character of King James. It's very interesting, though, if you look there, it says written and taken by Sir A.W. He doesn't even put his name in there. That's Anthony Weldon. But nonetheless, King James died on March 27th, 1625, as I told you a little bit earlier. And 25 years after his death, this book was written accusing the dead king of being a homosexual. 25 years after his demise, where he couldn't defend himself. Here's the facts. King James never claimed to be a homosexual, but on the contrary, regularly spoke out against it. King James wrote a book, The Kingly Gift. That's the translation of the Latin there. It was written in 1599, and it contained instructions to his son about how to properly carry out the responsibilities of the king, how to be a good king, including among his instructions were this: "There are some horrible crimes that ye are bound in conscience never to forgive, such as witchcraft, willful murder, incest, and sodomy." That's what he instructed his son about in that. In fact, July of 1610, James was asked to pardon a number of criminals. He did pardon several on the list, but he refused to pardon those who were convicted of sodomy. He advised his son, he says, especially eschew to be feminine. Be effeminate. He says, be a man, act like a man, behave like a man. James repeatedly referred to homosexuality as a horrible crime. Looking at some other things, no one alive in James's day ever accused him of being a homosexual. In fact, Bishop Godfrey Goodman, that is, Bishop Godfrey Goodman, who was not the king's friend. They were at odds, but Bishop Godfrey lived during the time that King James was alive, and when Weldon made his accusations, the bishop refuted it and said the king himself was a very chaste man. Sir Arthur Wilson was a historian during the time of King James, and he wrote James's life was decidedly pure and his own life pure. Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the customs of the time, but I'm telling you all this kind of stuff because this is one of the issues that they try and undermine the King James Version of the Bible. You accept a Bible version that was made possible by a homosexual. That's the reason I'm explaining this to you. But I'd like you to consider the customs of the time. It's also important to understand that King James lived in an age in which intimate, non-sexual relationships between males was common. Assassination of royalty was common in that day, and it was customary for kings to have bodyguards sleep in their beds, they were large beds, and outside of their doors as well. Now, nobody would ever accuse the adulterous heterosexual Henry VIII of being a homosexual. But guess what? Henry VIII routinely had his bodyguard sleep in his royal bed. It was the custom of the time. James survived 2 kidnappings and 4 violent attempts on his life. In fact, one of those attempts was by Catholic Guy Fawkes. They still celebrate Guy Fawkes Day, where he was trying to blow up King James and blow up Parliament. But anyhow, and so you can understand why they would want bodyguards. Such experiences did nothing to cause King James to break from the normal procedure of having bodyguards close at hand. I would have probably doubled the number, but anyway. In sharing his bed with the royal bodyguards, James was only following the normal practice of royalty of his time. Men kissing men as a form of greetings was common, and it was innocent. It was an innocent custom in the 17th century England, as well as 20th century, 21st century France as well, even today. Erasmus wrote this. Erasmus, did 1516, 1519, 1522, 1535, 1537 Greek New Testament. But here's what Erasmus wrote about the custom. He says, everywhere you come, you are received with kisses by all. When you take your leave, you are dismissed with kisses. You return. Kisses are repeated. They come to visit you. Kisses again. They leave you. You kiss them all around. Should they meet you anywhere, kisses in abundance. In fine, it says, wherever you move, there's nothing but kisses. Oh my. It's not my style. But it does say in the Bible, greet one another with a holy kiss. Now there's one lady I really love kissing. You want to raise your hand back there? Okay, that's my one. But anyway, I much prefer the handshake situation that we have today. But I'm just telling you the customs of the time. Now, when you read those things and you try and put our customs on them, they do seem strange. But here's my conclusion. The charge that King James was a homosexual has never been proven. They originated with an embittered political enemy of James who vowed he was going to get vengeance. He didn't try to get vengeance until the king was out of the way, and 25 years afterwards, and then he spilt his poison and spread his poison that had been picked up by King James Bible haters even now in our day. His charges are analogous to some tactics of modern politicians and operatives in attacking their foes today. I won't say anything about the impeachment, but anyway. Okay. Now we got through that, but here I want you to understand how God's hand moves. The Authorized Version, which is called in England, but it's also called the King James Bible, but how the King James Bible came into being. There was a number of Bibles that were in use at his time, Protestant editions. There was the Great Bible. You can see it down here. It was called Great because it was the largest of its size. In 1539, it was still used in the Church of England when they read the Psalms. They read the Great Bible. Then there was a popular Bible with the people, 1560s, called the Geneva Bible. I have a 1560, a real edition of it down there, first edition. It was loved by the people because it was really the first Bible that had verse divisions. Before that, there was no Isaiah 53:6, no John 3:16, no Ephesians 2:8 and 9. There was any Ephesians verse. In the 11th century, they put in chapter divisions, which aren't inspired of God either, but they loved it because of the verse divisions and because it was like a study Bible. The only problem was that it was heavily Calvinistic in its notes. And then there was the most unsatisfactory and useless of the old translations. It's down there. It's called the Bishop's Bible. And I like casting my bread on the waters, but the Bishop's Bible says in Ecclesiastes 11:1, lay thy bread upon wet faces. I prefer to cast my bread on the water. I do not want wet bread on my face. So anyway, that was what was going on. And there was a division in the Church of England. There were actually three, but there's two main parties. There was a low church, or the Puritan party, and then there was a high church, or the ritualistic party. Then there was one outside of that called the Pilgrims. But the Puritan party complained about the church being too Catholic. And so there was 1,000 Puritan ministers who, figuring that the king was coming from Protestant Scotland, they thought, maybe we can get the king's ear. So 1,000 of them signed a petition called the Millenary Petition. In Latin, millis means 1,000, and thinking to put pressure on King James to make some changes in the Anglican Church. They objected to a number of things, but they said the making of the sign of the cross just was, there's no biblical value to that at all, and I would agree, but making the sign of the cross during infant baptism, that wasn't right. The rite of confirmation, they said there's no biblical evidence or proof for that at all, and they said that having to wear a robe, they detested wearing robes. And so they were wanting the king to do that. They viewed all these things as extra biblical, if not unbiblical. They viewed them as too Catholic. So they sent this petition signed by 1,000 Puritan preachers. They were expecting to get their way, and King James had called a conference at Hampton Court Palace, and he wanted to get some of the most important people involved. January 6th, it had been a cold day in 1604. He called 50 prelates of the church together to straighten out some of the problems that were facing the church. And he didn't deal with any of those things. He rejected dealing with any of those type of things. But the president, a Puritan of Corpus Christi College in Oxford, his name was Dr. John Reynolds, he made a motion. He moved that His Majesty, that there might be a new translation of the Bible because those which were allowed in the reign of Henry VIII and Edward VI, who reigned just for a short time, and then after Edward VI, there was Lady Jane Grey, a Christian young lady who didn't last long because Bloody Mary came and took care of her. But Edward VI were corrupt and not answerable to the originals. Well, surprisingly, King James was receptive to that. You say, well, what is that picture for? Well, That's what it looks like in the court inside of Hampton Court Palace. And behind those windows is where these 50 prelates met. They met in the cartoon room. Now, if you see the cartoon room today, you would think, well, where's Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck? But interestingly enough, the cartoon room did not contain anything so foolish as that, but it had Raphael's paintings of the Acts of the Apostles and some others. For instance, the sacrifice at Lystra. This is one of the paintings in Acts chapter 14 and verse 8. Crippled and healed people, they called them gods when the apostles healed the people, and they called them gods, and they said, oh, no, don't do that. And then we have Christ charging Peter, Matthew 16 through 19, another painting of that. But going to what's going on as the 50 meet here, the king is receptive, saying, okay, we'll have a new Bible, because he detested the Geneva Bible, because the Geneva Bible undermined the divine right of kings. And King James thought that when you're the king, you are in the place of God, and nobody ought to mess with you. So he wanted to get rid of the Geneva Notes, among other things. So on July of 1604, King James wrote to Bishop Bancroft that he would appoint 54 learned men for translating the Bible. These men were the best biblical scholars and linguists of their day. The translating work was chaired by Bishop Lancelot Andrews, who had an intimate knowledge of Chaldee, Hebrew, Greek, Syriac, and 15 other languages. Some people have said, they aren't as good as us today. I can hardly speak English. And I know Greek. I teach Introduction to Greek in our Bible Institute. Hebrew, I know what a bagel is, and I know what a lock is. And we were missionaries in a country that spoke French, so I can say bonjour, monsieur, but you can tell that that's not my original language. It would be bonjour, monsieur, something like that, but you can tell it. But I'm telling you what, these men were scholars. All of them were efficient in Greek. All of them were efficient in Hebrew and Aramaic, or if you would, Chaldee, as it's called there. Now, the translation work did not begin, and it didn't begin here at Hampton Court Palace. We'll tell you where it began at, but the translation work did not begin until 1607. It took all that much time to assemble all those people together to be able to do the work, and so they had 6 translation teams to do that. There were 2 teams that met at Westminster Abbey. A little bit later on, you'll see where Dr. Stringer and I were there at Westminster Abbey. I have a little ritual that I do every time I go to Westminster Abbey, and he happened to catch it on camera. And then there are 2 teams that were at Oxford University, 2 teams at Cambridge University. This is the Westminster team, met here at Westminster. There was 10 from the Westminster team who were assigned to individually now, and they were assigned to translate Genesis through 2 Kings. Each one had to go through and translate individually Genesis through 2 Kings. The second had Romans through Jude. Now, I would have liked to have been on that team. I'd have been no help with the other team. But here's what I like to do every time I go to Westminster Abbey. I stop and pray at David Livingstone's grave. I pray for missionaries. Because though we look at David Livingstone, and he only had 1 convert, and that convert kind of backslid. But do you know what? He is still revered in Africa today because he opened the African continent to missions. And that's why don't pray for him, that's no good, but I do pray for missionaries around the world. Now, Dr. Stringer tells a story, not only do I stomp on Darwin's grave, but I dance on Darwin's grave. So anyway, but I think that Charles Darwin has done such a great deal to undermine confidence in biblical creation and our Bible. And I wish they would dig him up and get him out of there. So I stomp on his grave. But I think of Livingston. He said, God, send me anywhere, only go with me. Lay any burden on me, only sustain me. And sever any tie in my heart except the tie that binds my heart to yours. Livingston also said, death alone will put a stop to my efforts. And that still is true today. His heart is buried in Africa. His body is buried in Westminster Cathedral. Let's move on to the Oxford team. This is what's called the Oxford camera. It doesn't have anything with photography, but that's part of Oxford University. The Oxford team had to translate Isaiah through Malachi, and then they did the Gospels. The second team of 8 did the Gospels, Acts, and Revelation. The Cambridge team, they worked on 1 Chronicles through Ecclesiastes, and the King James Bible also had the Apocrypha in it. I would not have wanted to be on this team who worked on the Apocrypha. However, I do say that they separated out the Apocrypha between the Testaments, unlike the Catholics who had the extra part of Daniel, Bel and the dragon put in Daniel, and so on and so forth. They separated it out, and they wrote that you were not to make doctrine on this. It was there for its historical worth. But I still wouldn't want to have been on that team. I'm not going to go over all of them and bore you with it, but there were 15 general rules to be followed, and this helps you to understand the meticulous nature of their translation work, my friends. Every particular man of each company to take the same chapter or chapters and having translated or amended them severally by himself, where he think good, it says all to meet together, confer with what they have done, and agree for their parts, what shall stand. So let's just say that myself and Pastor Scudder, Dr. Sorensen, Pastor Reno, and Brother Stringer, Dr. Stringer, we're all given Romans. So we individually had to, on our own, translate the book of Romans, let's just say the first chapter, and then the others on the team who were assigned that to 2, we had to come together and compare. If I translated a word for, I can't think of a particular word right now, but if I translated a word different than Dr. Scudder translated or Dr. Stringer, then what we had to do at that point was give a justification of why we translated the word that way. Why did we translate that Greek word in the way that we did? And so we would have to come to an agreement which was the best word. Now look at this. It wasn't done when it went to our whole company. It says, as any one company had dispatched or completed any one book in this manner, they shall send it to all the rest, all the other teams. I mean, they were busy. No wonder it took them from 1607 to the publication date in 1611, because they had to judicially and carefully go over everything, because that's what King James required. He didn't have any input in the translation other than making it possible. He wanted the best people in the land. And by the way, neither did Shakespeare translate anything in the King James Version of the Bible. I've heard that too. It happens to be that Shakespeare used the Geneva Bible. The 3,000 times in Shakespeare's works, he quotes from the Geneva Bible, but he had no input or translated anything in the King James Version of the Bible. So it went around to the other teams, and if any company upon review of their books doubted or differed in some other place, they had to get together and say, what is the problem? What should the word be? What should the phrase be? I just want to tell you, it was so meticulously done. It says, when any place of special obscurity is doubted, letters to be directed by authority to send to any learned man in the land for his judgment on such a place. Letters were to be sent to the bishops and the clergy, and when they had ideas, they sent it back for their consideration. And it also says that the division of chapters aren't to be altered either at all or as little as necessary. And then this: no marginal notes at all to be affixed, but only for explanation of the Hebrew and Greek words. They could also do cross-references, give you cross-references, which can, without some understanding, they're just to be put there so help people to understand it, so briefly and fitly to express what's going on in the text. I just want to tell you this. Every part of the translation was examined at least 14 times. As the number of the companies were 6 and the number of each company varied from 7 to 10, it follows that every several part would have been examined at least 14 times distinctly, and many parts 15 times and some 17 times. They weren't done yet, even after all that. The final review. When the work was finally done by the Westminster team, the Oxford team, the Cambridge team, when the work was finally done, the finished product from each company was submitted to a 12-man committee composed of 2 of the brightest or the chief men of each company, which met at Westminster Abbey for the final review and preparation for the press. As the companies reviewed each book, they noted any questions or differences, and these matters were settled by the final committee. Now, I want to show you where this took place. This is the entrance to the Jerusalem chamber. Now, when Dr. Stringer and I were there, we were out by David Livingston's grave, and the steward came over to talk to us, and we were talking about things and telling him that we're both researchers, and I asked if we could go into the Jerusalem room where the final review had taken place. And she said, "Oh, no. That's a private residence. Nobody's allowed in there." And I said, "Can I talk to the head steward, please?" And so they called the head steward over, and it was a young lady, and I introduced Dr. Stringer and myself, and he told her that we both had written books on the King James Bible, and she says, "Oh, I love the King James Bible." And I said, "Well, really, I'd like to go over and see where the final review took place in the Jerusalem chamber." She says, "Oh, that's a private residence." And Dr. Stringer didn't quite get it. She said, "But about 2 minutes, I'm going to walk over there and unlock that door." So I'm watching, and we're looking around, and 2 minutes, she went over and unlocked the door and walked in, and I said to Brother Stringer, "Let's go." He's a little bit, "Go where?" So we go over there, and we open the door, and there's 2 ways to get in there, and so we're in between, and she says, "Shh, I've got to make sure that there's nobody there in the Jerusalem chamber before I let you in." And so this is the Jerusalem chamber. This is where the final review of the King James Bible took place. It is a beautiful place. And I thought she was going to rush us in and rush us out, but we get in there, and she says, "Here, let me take a picture of you two in the Jerusalem chamber." So here's Dr. Stringer and I in the Jerusalem chamber. I'm not going to tell you the story about Henry IV, but Henry IV thought he was dying in Jerusalem in the Holy Land, and he was dying in Jerusalem chamber here. But here's what I want you to see. All English Bible translation work stopped dead with the 7th purification of the English Bible. There had been a fury of translation work for the previous 85 years. It started out with Tyndale, it moved to the whole Bible in Coverdale, but still Coverdale had part of a Martin Luther's German translation in it. Then the Matthew's Bible, which had Tyndale's Genesis through 2nd Chronicles, but still had Luther's stuff in it. Then the Great Bible, which is just a revision of the Matthew's Bible. Then the Bishop's Bible. But come the publication of the King James Version of the Bible, all English Bible translation work ceased for almost 300 years until the infernal, underhanded work of Westcott and Hort to undermine the King James Version of the Bible in 1881 with their false, eclectic, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, Catholic text, Greek New Testament that they produced, that all the modern versions are basically built on the work of Westcott and Hort. Now, I do want to mention that there were 2 editions, and I have both editions. You have here the Great He Bible, published in 1611, and it's called the He Bible because of Ruth 3:15. It says, also he said, bring the veil, speaking to Ruth, that thou hast upon thee, and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her, and he went into the city. You can see the point there from the 1611. It was a typographical error by the one who set the type, and it's called the Great He Bible. In your Bibles, most all King James Bibles today are She Bibles. It was corrected in 1613, and the same passage of Scripture says, and she went into the city. So that's the difference, the He Bible and the She Bible. But I have been at many conferences where they have big signs and they say, King James 1611. I dare say that there isn't a single solitary person in this auditorium that has a King James 1611 except me. And it sits over there. This is not King James 1611. You say, well, what are you talking about? Well, there is a page from the King James 1611, and it's written in heavy black letter type, as you can see. And it also contained the Apocrypha. Mine is Roman type and has no Apocrypha. Well, what are we talking about? Oh, we don't carry an original 1611. How can you call yourself King James? Well, just let me explain it. There was a man named Francis Sawyer Paris, and in 1762, he took it upon himself. He was at Cambridge, Sydney Sussex College, and he and one of his fellow teachers at Magdalen College in Oxford together attempted to correct make consistent the spelling and punctuation in the King James Version of the Bible. They removed printers' errors, and they unified and extended the use of italics and standardized marginal notes, because in your King James 1611, 1612, 1613, way along the way, there was no consistent spelling, because son was spelled S-O-N like we spell it. It was spelled S-O-N-N. It was spelled S-O-N-E or S-O-N-N-E, among other things. There was no consistent spelling. The typesetter just typesetted it the way that he wanted to, and you'd have those different spellings in the same Bible, okay? So Paris came along, and he did a number of things. He used Lloyd's dates for chronology. He added those, and he increased the marginal references, and it was published by Cambridge University Press, is 1762, It's the oldest printing press that there is ever. It was instituted by Henry VIII in 1534, and it's been in continuous publication since then. But it wasn't all done, because we come to 1769, the Blaney edition, who picks up where Paris left off. There were almost 1,000 editions of the King James Bible printed between 1611 and 1769, and each one had minor corrections and changes and inconsistent spelling. So Dr. Benjamin Blaney of Hartford College undertook to refine the work of Dr. Paris in 1762, and he made extensive use of Dr. Samuel Johnson's 1755 first edition of the English Language Dictionary. Now, there's some differences in King James Bibles today. There's one that is using of the England English, and there's one that is using the American English, and let me explain the difference. You can look in yours. In one edition, Savior is spelled S-A-V-I-O-U-R, and armor is spelled A-R-M-O-U-R. In the other edition, Savior is spelled S-A-V-I-O-R and A-R-M-O-R and things like that. But it's all consistent, and basically all Bibles today are based on the 1769 Blaney King James Bible. He corrected more than 20,000 spelling and punctuation problems. He also made corrections in wordings there and all of those type of things. And so we do not use the King James 1611. Now, if you have a genuine 1611 that you want to sell for me for $5,000, please come and see me, because the only one I can find for sale is $85,000. And the one that I have on display only has partial pages from the King James 1611 version of the Bible, though I have a genuine 1612 and a genuine 1613. But now, also, just very quickly, the first Bible printed in the American colonies was not a King James Bible. It was the Elliott Indian Bible. It was in the Algonquin language. And he learned the Algonquin Indian language, and he used the Geneva Bible and then syllabolically translated it into the Algonquin Indian language. And so some of the words are 35, 38 letters long. But that was the first Bible published. However, all this garbage about the separation of church and state, that is not in our Constitution. I want to show you a Bible that was published under the Act of Congress. This is the 1782 Aiken Bible, and Robert Aiken was the printer of Congress in the Continental Congress, and it's called the Bible of the Revolution. And it was encouraged because England, after they lost to us, they wouldn't ship over Bibles. And so this small format King James Bible was published and distributed in the late 1700s, the early 1800s. Now, why I use the King James Version of the Bible. This is a very short version, just wrapping things up. We've heard about it several times, but there's two New Testament manuscript lines. There's the Eastern or traditional line right here, and there's a total of about 6,059 Greek manuscripts and portions existent today, and 98% all support the text that underlines the King James Version of the Bible. There are less than 50 manuscripts from the eclectic text line, primarily Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, that come from Egypt, and as Dr. Scudder showed us, Egypt was the place of apostasy. So these are corrupt. The Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus are the ones mainly used, and some of the three others. A book that I really appreciate by Dr. Jack Mormon is 8,000 Differences. It documents one after one. With the Greek, it's listed right out there, 8,000 differences between our Textus Receptus and the UBS and the Nestle-Aland. It shows the changes, the differences, things that are left out, 8,000 differences between the New T Greek words of the King James Bible and the modern Bibles.
But I want to tell you this. You can have the right Bible, but if you just let it sit on the shelf and you don't study it, if you don't memorize it, if you don't meditate on it, and if you don't implement it in your life, it doesn't matter if you have the right version of the Bible. The Lord said, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, cutting straight, rightly dividing the word of truth. So, as I bring this conference to a close, dig into your Bibles and study them. Thank you so much. It's been a blessing to be here at Quinton Road Baptist Church. Dr. Scudder, your entire staff have been such a blessing to us. We so appreciate being able to be here. God bless you all. Please be careful in going home. Thank you so much. So you are dismissed.